on approach to a remote town in Indonesia's Papua province.
Gear down.
A turboprop plane vanishes.
Trigana 267, Oksibil. Do you copy?
We tried to think positively that there's a chance the aircraft ended up landing at a different airport with limited communication.
Overseas, a search is underway for an Indonesian plane carrying more than 50 people.
A treacherous climb up a steep mountain leads to the worst possible news.
We'll reach the crash site.
No survivors.
The #1 priority is to find the black boxes.
With no clues, investigators hope the damaged black boxes will solve this puzzling case.
Can you turn that up? That's it.
Sentani Airport in Papua province, Indonesia. Trigana Air Service pilots Captain Hasanuddin and First Officer Ariadin are on a short layover before their 5th flight of the day.
What do we got, like 20 minutes? About that, yeah. I think I'll get up and stretch my legs. You want anything from the terminal?
I'm okay, thanks.
The pilots have already flown 4 short flights today in Papua. This leg will take them to a remote airport in the Oksibil area.
Typically, the flights of a commuter aircraft would be an hour or less. So the typical duty day for a pilot might include 4 or more takeoffs and landings. It's challenging in the sense of taking off and landing are the most risky parts of any aircraft flight. And doing so several times in a day could put different kinds of stresses on a pilot.
Hello.
Flight attendant Dita Amelia Kunyawan
Good afternoon.
has been with Trigana Air Service for 3 years and knows many of the regulars who fly this route.
Good to see you again.
49 passengers will be making the short trip to Oksibil.
Oksibil is a very remote area. So most of the passengers would be local government officials, local businessmen. Very few tourists go to Oksibil.
You want to switch on the way back?
No, I'm good for one more leg.
All set back there, Dita?
Good to go.
Thank you, Dita.
At 2:22 p.m., Flight 267 takes off.
Landing gear up.
Landing gears up.
Flaps set to 0.
Flaps 0.
The flight to Oksibil takes 40 minutes. The estimated arrival time is 3:04 p.m.
We're at 2,000 feet. Want to turn on the autopilot?
Autopilot engaged.
The pilots are flying an ATR 42-300, a twin turboprop short-haul aircraft.
The ATR-42 is a medium-capacity commuter-type aircraft. They're popular because they can get into smaller airports, places where you can't really get an airplane that's a 737 or 747 size into and out of the airport.
Minutes later, the plane reaches its cruising altitude of 11,500 feet.
Water?
The flight is so short,
We'll call Oksibil.
The captain is already preparing for the descent into Oksibil.
Oksibil, Trigana 267.
Trigana 267, Oksibil, copy.
We are beginning our approach. We'd like to descend from 11,500 feet.
Confirm descent from 11,500. Let me know when you are positioned over Oksibil.
Oksibil is a small airport situated in a valley. The mountains surrounding it can reach 11,000 feet.
Decreasing engine thrust.
244 knots and dropping.
Oksibil Airport is in a mountainous area. It sits in a valley. And on top of that, they have very limited navigational aids at that airport.
Without the aid of advanced landing systems seen at bigger airports, pilots flying into Oksibil must keep the runway in sight during the approach.
A visual approach, as the name implies, is an approach where the flight crew has to have the airport and the surrounding area in sight.
Cabin crew, prepare for landing.
In preparation, please straighten your seat back and stow your tray. I'll be coming around to collect any garbage you may have.
Big plans with the family?
Yeah, looking forward to some time off.
Yes. Been very busy these past few weeks.
Flaps 15. Gear down.
Wings Air 1250. Confirm descent from 12,000. Report when you are positioned over Oksibil.
5 minutes later, the air traffic controller at Oksibil realizes Flight 267 hasn't reported in as expected.
Trigana 267, Oksibil. Do you copy? Trigana 267, Oksibil. Do you copy?
One of the common things that happens when an airplane doesn't land at an airport for some reason is they may divert to another airfield. The crew landing the aircraft may have been too busy to call the airport before diverting to another airfield.
Hey, this is Oksibil. We've lost contact with Flight 267. Have you heard from the pilots? You haven't? We might have a problem here.
Word of the missing plane travels fast.
Overseas, a search is underway for an Indonesian plane carrying more than 50 people. The flight lost contact today over a remote area of the country.
As the news spreads, investigators with Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee, the KNKT, fear the worst.
My first impression was that something wrong had happened.
Not looking good.
Well, maybe they just diverted and haven't checked in yet.
We tried to keep thinking positively that there's a chance the aircraft suffered from some damage and ended up landing at a different airport with limited communication.
A search and rescue team is assembled, consisting of Army soldiers and search and rescue personnel.
They immediately began the search around Oksibil Airport because we learned from air traffic control that its last location was quite close to the airport.
Flight 267 was only 15 miles from Oksibil Airport when it last checked in with air traffic control. But search efforts come up empty until a pilot flying out of Oksibil Airport spots smoke billowing from nearby Tango Mountain.
We don't have a lot of information. We can only hope that the people on board have survived.
The day after, a pilot reports seeing smoke in the mountains surrounding Oksibil, Indonesia. The crash site of Trigana Flight 267 is located.
Yeah. 140 degrees, 29 minutes, 51.18 seconds east. Okay, got it. Thank you.
The wreckage is at approximately 8,300 feet on a ridge of Tango Mountain, 10 nautical miles from Oksibil Airport.
They went off course. How do they end up over there?
We need to get eyes on that crash site. I'm going to send one of our guys up.
A search and rescue team takes a KNKT investigator to the crash site. At over 4,000 feet above ground level, there are no roads, runways, or clearings. The only way to get to the crash site is on foot.
To reach the area, the team had to walk for about 4 and 5 hours. They have to climb, and quite steep with the dense vegetation. It's quite hard to get to the site.
After climbing for 5 hours, the team finally reaches the crash site. A field of debris stretches through Tango's thick forest.
Go ahead, Oksibil.
Jakarta. We'll reach the crash site. No survivors.
Okay. Once you catch your breath, the #1 priority is to find the black boxes.
Okay. Hey guys, check it out. We're looking for the FDR and the CVR.
Because of the remote location, bringing much of the wreckage down from the mountain will be impossible. So the investigator at the scene must document as much as he can and send photos back to headquarters. While the search and rescue team retrieves the remains of the 54 people that died, the KNKT investigator tries to determine exactly how the plane hit the mountain. The trees surrounding the crash site provide an important clue. They are sheared off in a straight line, indicating the plane flew head-on into the mountain.
That's right. There's no sign they pulled up.
How could the crew have flown straight into a mountain that's so well known to pilots? The investigation team's top priority will be to figure out what was happening in the cockpit at the time of the crash. The plane's flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder can be invaluable tools for the investigation. The damaged black boxes are shipped out for analysis. In the days that follow, family members mourn while they wait for the recovery of loved ones.
Basarnas beserta potensi SAR yang
search and rescue, along with the local help,
dan masyarakat di lokasi
have been successful in retrieving the 54 bodies.
Sebanyak 54 di dalam kantong jenazah.
They are desperate to know what caused the crash that killed everyone on the flight. It's up to KNKT investigators to figure that out. They first need to determine why the plane ended up off course.
Blue's the flight path in the approach chart. Here's where they crashed.
Flight 267 crashed about 10 miles west of the approach path into Oksibil Airport.
They went right and ended up here.
I'd like to know more about the terrain around here.
To determine the height of the terrain along the flight's path, investigators use special software that generates topographical data for the area.
Ketika kita telah mendapatkan semua informasi mengenai
When we learned about the location of the crash,
ada satu kesulitan tertentu yang
we had some difficulties. We realized it would be a challenge for us to identify the terrain height of the plane's debris.
terrain dari tiap-tiap bagian tersebut.
The topographical map reveals that the pilots were flying a treacherous route.
They were surrounded by mountains as high as 9,000 feet.
Why didn't they fly above them?
Investigators wonder if there was a mechanical problem with the plane that caused it to plow into a mountain.
Maybe the FDR can tell us.
Certainly, there would have been something in the flight data recorder that may have given an indication that some system on the aircraft wasn't operating as it should have.
When the recovered flight data arrives, Nakayo and Wibowo are eager to get their first look at how the plane was functioning at the time of the crash.
Wait a minute. This doesn't make any sense. He says the plane was going east, not south.
Kita berhasil mendapatkan informasi.
We were able to download this data that contained all the flight information. But the flight data we recovered didn't correlate with what might have happened on the day of the crash.
Hari itu.
And the time of day is wrong. So was the speed.
The flight data was not from the day of the accident.
Jejak penerbangan pada hari itu.
Digging even deeper into the data, the investigators come to a disturbing realization. The recorder wasn't working at the time of the crash.
Useless.
We found that the FDR had been experiencing several problems since 2012. It has been installed to an aircraft and found fault and then offloaded, went to the shop for repair, back again to the aircraft.
The malfunctioning FDR had no connection to the accident, making it much harder for Nakayo and Wibowo to figure out what caused it. Investigators still don't know why Flight 267 slammed into the side of a mountain. In the Indonesian province of Papua, the families of the 54 people on board Trigana Flight 267 lay their loved ones to rest, including flight attendant Dita Amelia Kurniawan. Overcome by grief, they want answers as to what happened.
Authorities have released new pictures showing the wreckage from the Indonesian passenger plane that crashed in the country's remote eastern region over the weekend.
KNKT investigators are facing intense pressure to determine why Flight 267 crashed. Without recorded flight data, the plane's cockpit voice recorder is investigators' last hope to learn what was happening in the air at the time of the crash.
They would be able to understand what was said to and from air traffic control, and they can also understand any kind of communication, formal or informal, that was taking place within the cockpit. That can be a huge indicator of something going wrong with that flight.
Fortunately, the CVR data is successfully recovered.
All right, we're ready? Okay, play it.
The CVR contains 2 hours of audio, including from the 2 flights prior to the accident flight.
I'll call down and let them know we're coming.
Investigators first listened to the pilot's flight into Oksibil from earlier in the day in the hopes of finding clues.
Oksibil, Trigana 267.
Trigana 267, Oksibil, copy.
We're beginning our approach. Would like to descend from 11,500 feet.
Confirm descent from 11,500. Let me know when you are positioned over Oksibil.
Oksibil.
We won't be over the airport. We're going to fly direct to a left base leg to runway 11.
Copy that.
Left base leg? That's not what it says in the charts.
They took a shortcut?
The CVR reveals that the pilots made an intentional deviation in their approach during their prior flight into Oksibil. The official approach directs aircraft to fly over the airport and then circle back and land. But on the earlier flight, the pilots flew directly to runway 11 without looping around. VR reveals that the pilots made an intentional deviation in their approach during their prior
500 feet, landing flaps and propeller speed are set and confirmed.
After flying the shorter approach, the pilots landed on the runway at Oksibil without incident. Investigators wonder if the pilots tried to repeat that shorter approach a few hours later, but with a very different result.
Let's skip ahead to the accident flight.
We're at 2,000 feet. Want to turn on the autopilot? Autopilot engaged.
Confirm descent from 11,500. Let me know when you are positioned over Oksibil.
Oksibil, we're flying direct to a left
base leg to runway 11.
Copy that.
So they take the same shortcut for the accident flight.
The last flight proceeds much like the crew's earlier flight into Oksibil.
Big plans with the family?
Investigators listen closely for any signs of danger.
Yeah, looking forward to some time off. Been very busy this past.
It's what they don't hear that raises questions.
They're not doing their approach briefing and checklist.
Briefings and checklists serve several functions. One of the key functions is to give the flight crew a better understanding of their environment. Not doing that makes it less likely that the pilot will remember to do certain things, or to take certain precautions, or to be aware of certain hazards that could be happening on that particular flight.
The team now knows that the crew missed a crucial step on their approach. But can the recording reveal anything about how the plane was functioning mechanically just before the crash?
Can you turn that up? Picking up anything with the engines?
Suara mesin.
We try to analyze the sound of the engine.
Flaps 15.
Gear down.
Bahkan suara propeller.
Based on the frequency and amplitude of the sound of the propeller,
amplitudonya atau besarannya.
We concluded that the engine and propeller were both in good shape.
Kita bisa menyimpulkan bahwa mesin dan propeller dalam keadaan.
Nothing unusual.
On the last phase of the flight, the CVR recorded that the condition in the cockpit was normal.
While listening to the final moments of the crash, investigators make a baffling discovery.
That's it?
Normally at the last second of the flight, the pilot would have been scream or do something.
It happened so fast. Sounds like they didn't even see the mountain.
investigators have a theory about the crash of Trigana Flight 267. They believe that weather may have obscured the pilot's view of the mountain. The team scrutinizes weather data recorded less than an hour before the crash.
Oksibil was covered by dense clouds.
The data reveals that at the time of the accident, Flight 267 would have been flying through an area of low clouds.
The clouds could have been quite dense here. Pilots wouldn't have been able to see much.
Yeah, but you know, Papua, you never really know what the weather's going to be like unless you're looking out the window yourself.
It is difficult to determine whether the flight was in cloudy conditions or not. In the mountainous area, it can be cloudy in one valley, it can be perfectly clear in another valley, and you go to another valley and it's completely covered.
To get a first-hand account of the weather conditions on the day of the accident, investigators speak to the controller on duty.
What was the weather like on our first flight into Oksibil?
It looked mostly clear.
And did the weather change on their second flight?
Yeah. The clouds rolled in. It was so dense that I couldn't even see the mountains.
The controller tells the investigators that he did inform the pilots about the cloudy conditions.
Oksibil, Trigana 267.
Trigana 267, Oksibil. Go ahead.
How's the weather looking for our approach?
You've got a cloud base of 8,000 feet.
The pilot's decision to continue flying with so much cloud cover surprises investigators.
In principle, when flying using visual rules, only one rule applies. To arrive safely, you must maintain visual contact at all times.
Visual contact bisa didapatkan.
Gear down?
The visual approach is not allowed to be done in the cloudy condition. So when the cloudy condition and they unable to see the whole mountain, they should follow the procedures.
But instead of following procedure,
They knew the base of the clouds was 8,000 feet.
they took a gamble that they would eventually catch sight of the runway.
They were descending, expecting to drop out of the clouds at any minute.
Instead, they crashed into a mountain at 8,300 feet. We still don't know why they didn't know they were in the path of a mountain.
With modern aviation technology, even if the pilots didn't see the mountain, the plane should have. So why didn't they know they were heading straight into one?
We need to check their warning system.
Apabila pesawat mendekati
When a plane is in close proximity to terrain or about to hit an object,
ada satu sistem khusus yang akan memberikan
there's a warning system that warns the pilot when the plane is very close to terrain.
atau pesawat tersebut mendekati daratan.
The warning system uses GPS and a terrain database to monitor an aircraft's height above the surrounding terrain. If the plane comes too close to the ground, the system will warn the flight crew with audio messages.
Terrain, pull up.
So pilots know to increase their altitude.
This is the profile of the mountain. This is our flight, descending through clouds, and the pilots can't see the ridge in front of them. Their proximity to the terrain would have activated the terrain caution here, 60 seconds before impact. Now, the pull-up warning should have gone off here, 30 seconds before. Were there any warnings going off in the cockpit?
No, there's nothing in the transcript.
The absence of audible alerts leads investigators to wonder if the plane's warning system was working properly. The team knows the FDR wasn't properly maintained. Could the same be true for the warning system?
We tried to dig deeper to see if the warning system had been properly installed in Trigana 267.
Last maintenance was performed on August 14th, 2 days before the crash. It appeared to be working normally.
When we looked into the maintenance record, we did not find any significant mention of something broken in the warning system.
With a faulty warning system ruled out, investigators now wonder if the terrain data used by the system was accurate.
This area is not very well mapped.
Some of the Papua area was very rough data. The precision of the data was not as close to the actual conditions.
If you fly in a mountainous area, the database itself might not detect the fine details of the contour of the terrain around you.
Did the lack of accurate terrain data mean the system wasn't able to warn pilots when they were too close to the mountainous terrain? The Trigana 267 investigators decide to speak with Trigana pilots who regularly fly in the Oksibil area to find out if they received terrain warnings. The pilots report that not only did the system provide warnings, it gave an excessive amount of false warnings due to the poor quality data.
If you're flying within a mountainous area, it can give you false warning or unnecessary warnings.
Was this area prone to false alarms?
Imagine you are trying to land in a small airport in the middle of the valley. You can see the airport in front of you, you're in visual conditions, and then the system starts giving you a warning.
Terrain, pull up.
You think, well, I can see the airport in front of me, I can see the terrain behind it. That warning is annoying.
And what do you normally do when you keep getting these false warnings? Hold on. He says sometimes they deliberately pull the circuit breaker. Sorry, go on.
It's an astonishing finding.
It might have been because of spurious or inappropriate warnings by the system. That is, it's telling you that you're close to the ground when in fact you're not. This is what I like to call the boy who cried wolf syndrome.
Terrain, pull up.
You know, the other flights we've done, we've had no problem. Let's just turn this thing off.
Terrain.
But if you pull the circuit breaker, you might forget that you've pulled it. And that's not good, because if you're going into a valley when it's still cloudy, you still need your systems no matter how unreliable that is. Any warning you get, if you don't have visual contact with the ground, you follow it.
Okay, thank you. They just pull the breaker to get rid of the false warnings. Apparently it's common practice.
Are you kidding me?
This revelation leads investigators to ask themselves a difficult question. Did Flight 267 lack terrain warnings? Because the pilots intentionally turned the system off.
Both the captain and the first officer were very experienced. In fact, I think these pilots are much more experienced than the average turboprop pilot.
We reached cruising altitude 11,500.
Is it possible the pilots were overconfident because they had flown this route so often?
We also asking questions to some pilots, particularly pilots that had experience flying with these two accident pilots.
Will you excuse me? I now have a pilot on the line that says he's personally seen Captain Hassanoon pulling the circuit breaker.
We found some information that some co-pilots flying with the captain knew that captain had the habit to inactivate the system.
Decreasing engine thrust.
Terrain, pull up. Terrain.
Overconfidence and complacency are two of the issues that are common in aviation. And what it leads to is certain equipment could be turned off because the pilots think that their experience in other aspects of flight will more than compensate.
Terrain.
Yeah.
When a flight crew operates deliberately with an aircraft that's not fully capable, they're increasing the risk of that flight.
Looking through the captain's records, investigators discover that the airline knew about his habit of pulling the circuit breaker.
It says here that they scheduled a briefing with him to address it.
Based on this information, we assume that that day, on the accident day, the captain also inactivated the system.
Terrain, terrain, pull up, terrain, terrain, pull up, terrain, terrain, pull up.
Investigators now believe that the pilots intentionally disabled their warning system on an earlier flight that day, and then never reset it.
If the system was active, I'm sure that the accident would have been avoided, because the last seconds of the flight before the impact, the system will scream, pull up, pull up. The pilot would have taken action to save the flight.
No wreckage relating to the warning system is recovered from the crash site. Investigators can't know for sure if the circuit breaker had been pulled. But even if the pilots were overly confident they could make the approach without the aid of the warning system, there's still something else that doesn't add up.
The pilots flew into this area all the time. Why were they flying so close to the mountains in the first place?
Investigators are trying to determine why pilots who were very familiar with the Oksibil area would risk flying so close to the mountains below them.
Can you pull up this approach chart?
A diagram in the corner of the approach chart informs pilots about the safe minimum altitudes in areas surrounding the approach path.
The approach chart says the minimum safe altitude in this area is 8,000 feet. Flight 267 crashed at 8,300 feet.
They were adhering strictly to the information that was there in the approach chart, but the information was wrong. And that wrong information put them at risk for colliding with terrain.
We're good to 8,000 feet.
Investigators believe the pilots were aware of the minimum safe altitude published on the approach chart. It's the last piece of the puzzle.
The crew thinks they're safe down to 8,000 feet. And on the accident day, the base of the clouds is 8,000 feet.
It makes the pilots feel as long as they're in the clouds, they're safe.
Decreasing engine thrust.
244 knots and dropping. Cabin crew prepare for landing.
What struck me more than anything was that this was so very preventable. This was a controlled flight into terrain event.
The investigation has uncovered a confluence of factors that led to the crash of Flight 267.
Big plans with the family?
Yeah. Looking forward to some time off.
It's been very busy these past few weeks.
At the core, two pilots who had grown overconfident flying the route so many times before.
Terrain, terrain, pull up, terrain, terrain, pull up, terrain, terrain, pull up, terrain, terrain,
I got this.
Pull up, terrain, terrain.
Because the captain had a reputation for pulling the ground proximity warning system circuit breaker, investigators suspect he disabled the system on an earlier flight that day. Then, on the last flight into Oksibil,
We're beginning our approach. Would like to descend from 11,500 feet.
Confirm descent from 11,500. Let me know when you are positioned over Oksibil.
Gear down.
The pilots failed to do their approach briefing or safety checks and relied on faulty approach charts.
There are three key things that could have avoided this accident: adherence to standardized procedures, the use of warning systems, and the use of cockpit resource management techniques, which could be as simple as, is there a checklist that should be used? Three very clear areas where any one of them would have prevented this accident. None of them happened.
In the aftermath of Flight 267, the KNKT makes a series of safety recommendations that will make the skies of Indonesia safer.
First of all, the charts needed to be updated.
We also asked the airline operator to request the database for the warning system to be updated with a more accurate version. Up to now, we noticed a significant drop in warning system violations. Also, since the approach chart for Oksibil has been fixed, we've seen a positive impact in terms of flight safety in Papua.
Area Oksibil memberikan dampak positif terkait dengan keselamatan penerbangan di Papua.
The lessons from this accident, the insights from the investigation, won't go away. They'll be here decades from now. I'm confident that the insights from this report will influence the design of equipment, will influence the design of procedures, will influence the kind of hazards that flight crews will look out for in the future.